Hello, you're watching special program here on TVR World. I'm Rahmat Idris. We come to you from the capital Jakarta, Indonesia. The year 2024 marks a milestone of diplomatic relations between Indonesia and the United States of America. Even more special this year, now that we are 1 year into the implementation of the so-called comprehensive strategic partnerships and elevated cooperations between the two countries. And we are here today to sort of dig deeper to see what the opportunities and challenges are ahead for the two countries. And joining me for these special conversations are two very special guests. We have right next to me is the lecturer on international relations of Padjadjaran University, Mr. Teuku Rezasyah. Thank you very much, Pak Teuku, for joining me in this conversation.
I'm honored. Thank you very much.
And at the end of our table is researcher, Center for Strategic and International Studies, Mr. Andrew Mantong. Mas Andrew, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much, Mrs.
Right.
Des.
I mentioned earlier that this is a joyous occasion, a momentous occasion at the end of the year, because we've seen celebratory moments taking place across the country here in Indonesia, in Jakarta, in Surabaya, and also in the U.S. We've seen celebrations of 75 years anniversary of Indonesia and U.S. relations in Washington, D.C., in other cities, pockets of Indonesian diaspora, meaning that there is quite a euphoric moment for the number 75, Mas Andrew and also Pak Teuku. Let's go over to you first, Pak Teuku Rezasyah. Based on your analysis and the span of these many years of our bilateral relations, what are some of the biggest highlights of the relations between Indonesia and the United States of America, as all the ups and the downs of it all?
There are always ups and downs. It's based on the ongoing national interest of the two countries and also the qualities of the top leaders here and there. Yeah? But in my opinion, the relationship has been up and down. For example, in 1962, when we had cooperation with the Soviet Union to take back Papua, we were not with the U.S. And then in 1965,
so it was seen as we are leaning towards the Russians instead of the Americans.
At the time. Okay. And then when we were led by Bung Karno, the U.S. was not happy. And then when Pak Harto came to power in 1965-67, the U.S. was so happy. And then when we had ASEAN, the U.S. was so happy. And then when the U.S. was in difficulties in 1975 in Vietnam, they needed Indonesia and they encouraged us to come to East Timor at the time. Sometime in December 1975, President Gerald Ford and Foreign Secretary Henry Kissinger, they came. And then after that, we came to East Timor. So there was always up and down. And then 1980-something, we joined APEC. They were so happy we joined APEC. And then when we were in difficulty sometime in 1998, they pushed us to the corner.
Right.
And then nowadays, the U.S. wanted us to be with the U.S. because the U.S. knows the quality of Indonesia, the potentials of Indonesia.
We are the biggest economy in Southeast Asia, which is very strategic to be allied with.
Correct, 40% something. And then the USA was unhappy at the moment because we showed a tendency to join BRICS, yeah? And then recently President Donald Trump also said that they who join BRICS will receive special
tariffs
from the US.
He's always threatening with tariffs.
Well, the good thing of Donald Trump is he expressed himself clearly. Yeah?
Right.
So it helps the world to adjust.
Right. We'll go to Donald Trump in a bit, but I'd like to go to Mr. Andrew first. Mas Andrew, when you look back in retrospect to the 75 years, based on your analysis of our relations so far, Indonesia and USA, what are some of the bigger highlights in your opinions?
Well, I agree with Pak Reza that we have some ups and downs in our bilateral relationship. Yeah. But also at the same time, I would say that our relationship has been suboptimum. We can reach some better deals, some better engagement with the U.S., given the fact that we are both two democratic countries.
Yeah. The second and the third biggest.
Yes.
USA is the second, we are the third biggest democracy in the world.
But clearly, these similarities does not necessarily or automatically translate into the so-called optimum relationship. We still have some divergences in the way we manage, for example, great power relations. We still have some unfulfilled expectations when it comes to our desire to get more access to U.S. market, for example. And the U.S. still want Indonesia to choose more, clearer stance when it comes to issues like, for example, South China Sea, China rice, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, international borders then,
So even though we have similarities in terms of democratic values, with, of course, some of the differences and variation in the way we perceive democracy, we practice democracy, but these similarities does not necessarily come into convergences when it comes to other factors, such as geopolitics, differences in economic development, economic trajectories, and so on and so forth.
Right. November 2023, just a little over a year ago, Pak Teuku, we have elevated our relations with the U.S. into the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. What does it entail, in your opinion?
It means both of us find that not only we are very important to each other, but we have also encouragement to elevate the level of cooperation. For example, at the political level, more consultation. And then at the economic level, more agreements being made. And then at the socio-cultural level, more exchanges. So this is, and then also in this, when it comes to comprehensive strategic partnership, US is not the only one. We also have the same thing with China. And then in this case, I find that the both of them are trying to take, to make sure that Indonesia is psychologically aligning with them.
We are pitted in between these two big rivalries of these economies.
Yes, that's why to operate a free and active foreign policy is not easy, because we need to see when it comes to US-China rivalries, there are so many chessboard. Geopolitical chessboard, we are getting closer to the US. But when it comes to geoeconomic chessboard, we are closer to China. And when it comes to socio-cultural chessboard, we try to be close to the US and close to the China at the same time. So this is the story of operating a free and active foreign policy. But the most important thing is, okay, we have had this free and active foreign policy. It has been there since 1948 when Bung Hatta introduced the idea in the foreign affairs. The problem is, do we have a national interest when we are dealing with the US and when we are dealing with China? And at the same time, how do we see ourselves? I think if we see President Prabowo's active foreign policy ventures in the last 6 months and also recently, we can say that it is about time for Indonesia to state how it sees itself. In my opinion, it is about time for Indonesia to say that we are a qualified middle power. Because middle power is not only relying on its position in one part of the world, but also its capacity to develop multiple negotiation with countries all over the world. I think it's about time for Indonesia. But how do we organize a job description and job specification of all actors inside Indonesia in supporting our national interests with the US and also with the China?
Over to you, Mas Andrew. 13 months into the implementation of comprehensive strategic partnership, how have you seen it's benefiting Indonesia in its overall scheme of cooperations with the U.S.?
Well, as Pak Reza mentioned, the most noticeable points of the bilateral relationship, especially under comprehensive strategic partnership with the U.S., is the increased engagement of U.S., especially in defense and military sectors.
I see.
In the past years, I believe that we have been witnessing some of the increasing ties with the U.S. military in terms of training, even defense procurements, which make us geopolitically more integrated with the U.S. While at the same time, on the economic side, the story is rather different. We are China becomes our one of the most largest trading partners, sources of investment, and it creates some, not tensions,
if that's
some sort of questions among people in Washington D.C. of where Indonesia is heading to, especially also with recent examples, like for example controversies over overstatement of Prabowo and Xi Jinping on a joint development in overlapping claims, for example. So
And also about UNCLOS and the 9
Yes.
Daslan statements, which is confusing
Yeah.
to the Southeast Asia region at the moment.
But in the way I see the comprehensive strategic partnership, it also has been built on existing repertoires of bilateral relations between U.S. and Indonesia.
Right.
So we have a strong footprints, for example, on moving forward with ASEAN, especially on cooperation related to counterterrorism and radicalization, which also has become the backbone of U.S.-Indonesia relationship. Our relationship has become better after the end of Cold War, since the U.S. waged the war on terror, which also finds some footprints in Indonesian policies.
Right. So the counterterrorism thing is also, it falls into the category of security and defense, but still the economic perspective of it all, we need to strengthen our bilateral relations. More on that in the next part of our conversations here in the 75 years of anniversary of relations between Indonesia and the USA. We'll be right back after the short commercial break. Don't go anywhere. Hey there, welcome back. You're still watching a special program here on TVR World. The 75 years anniversary of bilateral relations between Indonesia and the United States of America. I'm still joined by 2 special guests for the conversations. Just to echo what was said earlier in our previous segment, Pak Reza from Mas Andu, was the fact that we seem to lean more to the U.S. From the perspective of security, military and defense cooperations, politics in a way, probably because of the fact that we are sharing the 2nd and the 3rd positions of the biggest democracy in the world, but more on the economic perspective with its rival, which is China. Share with us your thoughts on this, sir.
I know this is a very difficult decision, to decide that when it comes with the U.S., we focus more on strategic kind of relations, and at the same time we expect also the U.S. To cultivate further economic relations with Indonesia. But surprisingly, we used to have something called Garuda Shield.
Garuda Shield?
Yes, it was a defense defense training program, defense practice program between our Marine and then U.S. Marine. More than 3,000 U.S. Marines were here, and they practice guerrilla warfare and then jungle warfare in 3 different islands of Indonesia. So I think
some sort of military drill or simulations, you would call it? Yeah.
And then the year after, we developed something else called Super Garuda Shield. It means we do not share this kind of experience with China, not with Australia, not with other countries. This is with the U.S. So we have developed a sense of trust with the U.S., not only at the policy-making level, but also at the group level. Because when it comes to the military training, oftenly we had a dual operation on specific day. So we see how our commandos work in tandem with the U.S. commandos, and they are sharing their technologies, they are learning from each other. It is amazing. At the end, they had their own, what do you call it? Their own, we call it pancho. What is pancho?
Like an armed strength of arms competitions.
Yes. But it shows that the close relations has reached the lower than the battalion level, has reached the group levels. So if we see during the training, the face of the Indonesians, they were so happy, and then the face of the Americans, they were also happy, because not very often they can practice in the tropical region.
Right.
Oh, yes.
So this is happening in recent years, right, Pak Reza? Meaning that it happened when the then defense minister was still our president, Prabowo Subianto.
Correct.
At this moment.
I think it was done during Pak Andika Perkasa period here. And I'm sure that Pak Prabowo has further ideas here how to cultivate a better defense relations with the US. Yeah.
However, Mas Andu, the bigger question is, the U.S. is known for its advanced technologies, for its innovative sciences, and we seem to lack cooperations in that particular departments in terms of adoption of technology into our country. What do you think of this?
Yeah, it's even becoming more complicated since we banned iPhone 16.
Yeah.
And
that is another major issue that
during Jokowi administration, we tried to invite more investment from Tesla, for example. We've been inviting Elon Musk to come to Indonesia. But at the end of the day, they choose to build the factories outside Indonesia in our neighboring countries. So it tells us that when it comes to technology transfers, catching up with technology, I think one of the biggest not recipe, but the biggest wisdom when it comes to technology transfer is no one's going to give it to you. You have to have certain policies that would catch investment and then create a condition where your human resources are able to catch up with the pace of industry that is developing. When it comes to, for example, policies like banning iPhones, at some point it works to create some kind of incentive for a local component and so on and so on.
But it doesn't make good headlines, international headlines, though, the fact that we are banning the sales of iPhone 16 here in the country. I mean, all of these international news outlets are just informing the world that we are refusing to sell it due to the lack of local commitment.
Some of the commentators says that Indonesia is brave enough to have this kind of policy. It's about time because we have a huge market and so on and so forth. But that's one story. Another story is when we invite Elon Musk. Even though no matter how he is integrated with the current U.S. administration, private sectors is still private sectors. When they are seeking for investment opportunities,
he was selling Starlink at that point instead of investing and opening factories in our country.
They always see the domestic factors, like in Indonesia, whether the investment would be efficient or not, whether there would be some ease of doing business or not. We are still having our own homework when it comes to U.S.-Indonesia relations in terms of technology transfer. We have to create this good, conducive kind of environment in our domestic home in order to create more opportunities for the U.S. This is the thing that cannot be done by the U.S. government. It's up to the U.S. businesses, but to what extent the U.S. government can ask the private sectors to invest in Indonesia, sometimes it's beyond their decision.
Are we attractive enough for these private sectors in the U.S. to sort of expand here in our country? And that is the biggest question. I mean, not to note the fact that Apple's commitment to sort of open up their factories for the Apple AirPods and all the apparels of the products, not necessarily the main iPhone factories that we are looking for, that we are seeking. But just to add to your point, Mas, why, opposed to what you've been saying, is it so much easier to have all of these outpouring investments coming in from their rivals, which is China? I mean, we are presenting them with the same opportunities, the same offers, but then again we have more investments, more economic offers coming in from their rivals, which is China. I'd like to have both of you to comment on this.
Well, it's not easy to have same proportional investment from both sides. When it comes to China and comparing Chinese investment with the U.S. investment, the U.S. investment and its allies, sometimes they rely more on ESG standards, the economic, social governance, human rights, labor kind of standards, which from China, the investment are usually coming from the state-owned enterprises and or directly controlled by state in China. Sometimes they can have more leniency for a country like Indonesia who are still struggling with domestic reform.
I see.
And when it comes to U.S., sometimes, and its allies, they try to use more standards as barriers for their markets. They try to use these standards as to improve and to elevate the sort of playing field for their investment to come. And this is the thing that sometimes Indonesia and some other similar developing countries are struggling to attract more investment from the US. Sometimes it comes with the high demand, or whether we have met some certain environmental standards, whether we have met some certain labor standards, and so on and so forth. This is the most complicated things.
Right. So just to put it on an easier term, China is more loose when it comes to regulations and also on our part, but it's more rigid when it comes to our agreements with the US. Your thoughts on this, Padjadjaran?
Yes, the problem with the US investments inside Indonesia, they are theoretically orientated. So before they invest, they would like to check, do we have a capacity to perform in the area of good governance at the government level, and then good corporate governance at the business level. Again, good governance and good corporate governance at the local level. And then another issue is rule of law. They often question our capacity to maintain rule of law and to protect their companies, because oftenly US companies are here, but they are not registered here. They're registered in Singapore. It means Singapore has a higher capacity to deal with the changing international law, international environment. And they often ask...
the headquarters of Southeast Asia is in Singapore. We're just a subsidiary.
Correct. It's quite sad, isn't it?
Right.
Because thousands of workers are here, and then also they are not they always ask efficiency and effectiveness, because oftenly we cannot run as fast as they expect.
Right.
So because of this, we have to wait for the US investments to come, and at the same time, for the US government, for them, business is business, nothing underneath the table. They know, for them, there is no such commission, there is no such kickback.
Everything is clear. Right out the gate, instead of all of these transactions behind the door, or the handshakes under the table.
No such thing. Even they question our capacity to work based on the sustainable development goals at the state level and also at the provincial level.
Right. We are going to take another quick break before we continue on with this topic. Do stay with us right here on TVR Our World, our special program of 75 years of diplomatic relations between Indonesia and the US will return in just a few minutes. And you are still watching our special program here on TVR Our World, celebrating 75th anniversary of diplomatic and bilateral relations between Indonesia and the United States of America. From here, Jakarta, we go over to Washington, D.C. in the United States of America, where we have our colleague there standing by, Azalia Johannes, at 121 years old. The Embassy of Indonesia in the USA, that is located in Washington, D.C., is even older than our country itself, and it is an architectural gem that attracts locals and visitors alike. In the spirit of commemoration of 75th anniversary of Indonesia and the U.S. diplomacy, very own Azalia Johannes will now take us inside the Indonesian embassy in Washington, D.C. to sort of marvel at its architectural prowess and also take us through its legendary past. Take a look at this next report from Azalia.
Here in Washington, D.C., it's hard to pass by 2020 Massachusetts Avenue without looking up.
It's really beautiful, it's really grand.
And it's just beautiful.
It's kind of unique.
With its soaring marble columns and ornate windows, the Indonesian embassy is a spectacular sight to behold. And today, we're getting a glimpse inside. Immediately as you walk in, you're greeted by this amazing central staircase. Kind of reminds you of those staircases on luxury ocean liners of the past. And check out what's illuminating this entire hall, a magnificent skylight like no other. With vast ballrooms, painted ceilings, and even a pipe organ, no expense was spared when building millionaire Thomas Walsh's new home in 1903. The Irish immigrant who had struck gold out west wanted an opulent residence to entertain Washington's elite. And this sumptuous 4-story, 60-room home did just that, hosting lavish soirees for guests ranging from presidents to royalty. Local realtor and content creator Joe Himmeley researches DC history and architecture.
He entertained Teddy Roosevelt here. He entertained many other very important people throughout the years in this house. And the stories of the amount of alcohol and food that were given to their guests is legendary.
The person behind many of those parties, Thomas's daughter, Evelyn Walsh McLean, socialite and former owner of the infamous Hope Diamond. Believed to have been struck by the diamond's alleged curse, McLean suffered tragedies both personal and financial. Still, she managed to hang on to the house, even loaning it to the Red Cross during World War II.
They actually made hundreds of thousands of surgical kits in this building to be distributed around the world for the soldiers.
In 1951, following Mrs. McLean's death, the Indonesian government purchased the house for the bargain price of $300,000, quickly working to restore the building and adding Indonesian touches along the way. Ida Bagus Made Sade Bimantara is currently interim head of mission here at the embassy. This building has a reputation of being a little haunted. I must ask you, have you yourself been spooked?
Ooh, yes. It's a matter of whether you believe it or not. But people have experienced it.
Throughout the year, the public gets opportunities to take in the embassy's beauty from the inside. Dance practice and gamelan lessons are held here, and once a year, the embassy opens its doors to thousands of visitors as part of the city's Around the World Embassy Tour.
We introduce our culture, our food, our products, services, the best that Indonesia has to offer.
But soon, the embassy will be closing its doors, not permanently, just for renovations. A restoration project much needed and long overdue.
It's been more than 6 decades that this building has not been renovated, restored. So as any buildings, of course, it will need some TLC.
What I would expect to see is a large amount of money spent to basically make sure the outside is secure. The roofing shingles are correct, the plaster is right, the bricks are in good shape, all of that sort of work. But the other aspect of it is to make sure it's more eco-friendly, that it has insulation installed, that they have the electrical and the other systems inside of it brought up to 21st century standards. Because as I'm sure you can imagine, they did not wire this for the internet back in 1901 because it didn't even exist.
As Indonesia marks 75 years of diplomacy with the U.S., the embassy has one eye on the past and another on the future.
We want to make this building sustainable, green, with green energy as well, and also something that the public and also the Indonesian people who work here can be proud of.
For TVRI World, Azalea Johannes, Washington.
All right, thank you very much, Azalea Johannes, for taking us around the historical building of Indonesian Embassy in Washington, D.C. That was a quite interesting soundbite there. It's haunted, apparently. You've been there, Andrew. Walk us through your first-hand account of your visit at the Embassy of Indonesia in Washington, D.C.
It looks majestic. Like it is historic, it looks majestic. They got some sense. I don't know why. But once you enter the building, you can see that it's like a mix between the Indonesian culture and the sort of legacy of the building itself.
Looks Victorian to me in a way.
Yes. But I think Indonesian diplomats who have been posted there have given some of the traditional touch. Like you can see some of the paintings coming from Indonesia.
But the original architectural elements of it are still maintained. Because
but one thing I'm concerned
part of it.
One thing I'm concerned about the embassy though.
Yeah.
We have not designated our ambassador there. Pak Sade, the one is in the video.
Yeah.
He's DCM. He's the head of mission. We have not appointed.
Charles de Fer or something.
And the position have been heavily rotated between different persons. Now it's remain vacant. So if we don't manage that clearly, it gives some very wrong sense that we are not serious enough.
Right.
with developing Indonesia-US relations.
Well, it goes without saying, Pak Reza, that an embassy is an extension of Indonesian government, Indonesian people, and a certain country. Walk us through the importance of our Indonesian government and the embassy in Washington, D.C. to sort of bring over the missions from Indonesian people and our diaspora being there in the U.S. from your own experience in the USA.
Well, that embassy is a classical building, isn't it?
Yeah.
More than 130 years of age.
Yeah.
And it shows the quality of the Americans.
That explains the haunted part of it. Being
when they
so
build,
old,
lasts very long. Yeah. And then the role of the embassy is very important because in accordance to the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic and Consular Relations, that is the building of for all Indonesian diplomats to protect, to promote Indonesian interests, and then to report, and then to represent Indonesia, and also to negotiate. That's the place. And that place, even though it was built by the America in the American land, but still it is part of Indonesia. Not many. It is not easy to come and go.
Right.
Because that's our premises.
Right. Moving on to more recent events taking place also in Washington, D.C., Pak Reza, the 12th of November 2024, a historic meeting of our newly sworn-in President Prabowo Subianto with President Joe Biden. A lot of topics were on the table, conveyed to the media. Topics on Gaza, South China Sea, technology and energy, and a nuclear reactor at some point was also in the conversations. Artificial intelligence and sustainable agriculture, because President Prabowo is very, very keen on building some sort of food security in our country. What are some of the biggest from your analysis, key takeaways from the meeting of our newly sworn-in President Prabowo Subianto, sort of blazing the trail for our future cooperations under his administration?
So when Prabowo came back, he had with him a huge package, about 400 billion rupiah project,
from all investment.
Okay. And the important things for Indonesia is to make sure that we can take care of the investment, and then we have enough rules and regulation to make sure that the already planned program as the US will work.
Okay.
So I'm very happy to see our president. We had an intimate telephone with President Donald Trump. The 2 minutes and 50 seconds discussion was very fruitful. It shows that two of them are at the same frequency.
Okay.
But the
media says that he's very eager to talk to Trump.
Yes.
What does it signify?
Well, Trump said you have a very good English, and then Prabowo said that most of my training as a military was done in the US. So we are dealing with two leaders who understand each other's system and each other culture. So no, it's about time for Pak Prabowo to ensure that the Indonesian bureaucracy, Indonesian rules and regulations can adapt with the new kind of influx of investment coming from the US.
Right.
Because they want to make sure that is our money going to the right path?
Right.
For example, in this case, we need to prove that we can invest, the environment is good, the people are investment inclined, and then the training for the workers are there. Because the good thing of the American investments is they bring with them only top executives.
Right.
They do not bring with them lower echelons, what we call the blue collar workers. No, they bring with them the white collar workers. So this is about time for Indonesia to talk with the US that we have had enough people to work with you and then to accept your investment, and then we need to also to make sure that our people are qualified, not only in terms of language, but also in terms of electronic correspondence, in terms of international culture, and also understanding of the American business character. So it is not easy from the Indonesian side.
Right. Anything to add to this, Mas Andrew?
We have to put the recent visit into context. Before that, we have some controversies over Prabowo's statement and Xi Jinping.
Right. Because it is a part of a series, highly prestigious meetings of our newly sworn-in president. Top of the list was President Xi Jinping's in China, and then Joe Biden, and then APEC or London, if I'm not mistaken, and then Brazil, which I was a part of for the G20 meeting. High-profile visits there.
It's a good thing that the visit happened
Yeah.
right after our visit to China. So
Yeah.
it gives the sense of maintaining free and active kind of position of our
Yeah.
policy. And it's some of the statement from the White House chief. It gives some sort of direction that Indonesia should consult
Right.
to our lawyers when it comes to issues like South China Sea.
Does it say
during the-
something, though, that we visit President Xi Jinping first and then Joe Biden, or should it be prioritized for the U.S. visit first, or doesn't matter?
I rather not
this point?
read deeper into the
order of
the
visits,
sequences
yeah. Okay,
of the
yeah.
visit. It's just like, from the geography point of
Yeah.
view, it's going to be
Yeah.
easier for us to come to China
Yeah.
first.
But
and
the
then
substance
to the
matters
US.
here, because South China Sea, as you mentioned, all the statements that's been made about the clash between Nine-Dash Line and UNCLOS agreement there.
Yes, and the thing that we can say about President Prabowo intention, he really have the intention to play some cards when it comes to great power competition between US and China. I think he's quite eager to even explore some new things, like, for example, on South China Sea issue and so on and so forth. But one thing that is so unfortunate with his visits to US is just it happened with the administration that is going out.
The outgoing administration.
Yes,
The
yes.
timing is a bit.
Yeah.
The carryover cannot be guaranteed. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
As a result of this conversation,
Because we
he's
can
going to need to do another one
Sure.
with the new administrations after January the 18th.
Yeah, because we can expect some of the dramatic changes in U.S. policies, like, for
Exactly,
example, on
yeah.
energy transitions,
Yeah.
on the way they manage their foreign affairs, on the way the sort of diplomacy being conducted with the U.S. Trump has been famous for this sort of transactional approaches. President Prabowo might find some opportunities with the new style of leadership in the U.S., but we also might find some of the difficulties when it comes to major macroeconomic decision practiced by the U.S. We did have a trouble when President Biden, for example, implement the Inflation Reduction Act for our investment related to critical minerals and energy transition. But also at the same time, we had a major opportunities in G20 meetings, where the U.S. and its allies agreed to have this program called JETP.
Yeah.
Now
Just
Trump
energy
is coming.
transition program
Yes.
with U.S. at the helm.
True, and now Trump is coming. I don't think he's interested enough in this kind of
He
climate
wanted to be
change.
out of the Paris Agreement
Yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
his terms.
So yeah, that would be
A major shift.
we need a second visit to reassure that we are still on par in terms of bilateral relations, and we get more opportunities than difficulties. There would be some opportunities, but it really depends on how Jakarta manage the foreign policy with U.S. in the focus, and how Washington do it vice versa.
Right. So you're saying that this is more like a courtesy visits because he was just sworn in as our president, and to visit all these
And the road.
top level leaders around the globe. But more importantly, to have a more concrete meeting once they have a new administrations kicking in, starting January the 18th. I'd like to put the moving forward sections with Donald Trump in focus later on in the next segment. But on that point, Mas, you also mentioned the climate change and also the commitment of our government towards that act, because so far it's been one of the biggest homework for Indonesia, especially with the result of COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, which was just sort of nullified what has been achieved in Dubai a year before that. In terms of phasing out the use of fossil fuel. On that note, Mas, how do you think, moving forward, Indonesia will take a stance in terms of being able to address some of the biggest issues in climate change? We are now bargaining our carbon credits. We are receiving JETP, big money there, but lack of concrete programs to reach the net zero emissions, and it's not as easy as just flipping your hands when we want to shut down all of our coal mines. What are the concretes here? Maybe each of you will contribute to this conversation. But
in today's era, we need to aware that this is the era of transparency.
Okay.
In case we are conducting wrongdoings, the rest of the world will know. So in this case, when it comes to decision making should be based on data.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to decision, it should be based from coordination between top-down and bottom-up, and involving the people.
Yeah.
And in this case, when it comes to making long-term commitment, it is not just a promise of the current regime. It's a promise of the Indonesian today and tomorrow and the next 10 years, next 20 years. Because this is something we need to convince the world that we are playing by the book.
Okay. Okay, Mas Andrew, your take on this?
We've been discussing about the complexities of our investment issues and economic issues. And one of the most even important points when it comes to these issues are the fact that the economic business, energy business, environment business has been increasingly influenced by great power politics, which means great power politics, great power competition does not only affect security and military fields, but also these fields. And energy transition is not exception for this. You know, if you look at the statistic, one of the biggest transforming kind of country in terms of energy has been China. And at the same time, US has also been using these issues to become one of the focal point of the competition. Like, for example, President Biden policy on Inflation Reduction Act, which eventually affect to our biggest commodity, which is nickel, which is also instrumental in energy sort of transition, making EVs and so on and so forth. In the near future, I think for Indonesia to navigate through this kind of murky situations where these issues that is supposed to be a global commons issues, you know, everybody should care about energy transition. Otherwise, our Earth are getting warmer and warmer. It's like a Game of Thrones situation when you are facing zombie, but at the same time you're busy with your own competition. This is the right time for us to come back to our roots of free and active foreign policy, which means diversifying. So we have to be diligent in finding some opportunities that is coming from China and finding some of the opportunities that is coming from the US. But at the same time, we also
in terms of energy transition, you're saying?
Yeah, improving our coordination with other middle power countries. Like, for example, if JETP stops from the US under Trump, you need to have new alternative sources of fundings, for example. And we have to approach European Union, we have to approach Japan, and so on and so forth. At the same time, if IRA was cut, if IRA is going to be cut by President Trump, then probably some opportunities happen. This is the time where Indonesia can go hand in hand, for example, with country like South Korea in finding the new opportunities for our nickels to be main of the components of the EVs industry in the US and other US markets and US allies. So these are very complex game. It really requires a careful calculation from Jakarta, and it really requires for us to marshal our resources.
I guess at this point we should be optimistic about the JETP, Mas Andrew, because I've spoken to a number of ambassadors representing countries within the JETP program, the ambassadors of Norway, the ambassador of Finland, these Scandinavian nations who are really just leading the world in charge of transforming the energy transition. And that is just a small part that's playing within the gear of the Just Energy Transition program with the US at the helm. However, with the change of administration later on, which is something that we're going to discuss in the next segment, Donald Trump is playing into the picture. We're going to talk about it in the next segment. So do join us right here on TVR Our World as we return in just a few minutes for the final part of the special program, 75th anniversary of Indonesia-USA. We'll be right back. We have now arrived to the final part of our special program here on TVR Our World as we celebrate 75 years of diplomatic relations between Indonesia and the US. Still joined by two very special guests here in the studio. I'd like to go first to you, Pak Reza. As I mentioned earlier, this is we're going to dedicate this beginning of the segment to the upcoming presidents of the USA, which has, for lack of a better word, in recent times stirred the water already before the inauguration, before he is sworn in January 18th, just next year. The upcoming president, Donald Trump, has been making headlines in terms of you know,
Yes.
relations with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, for example, in Canada, Panama just lately, and just a little over a week ago, exactly a month before his inaugurations, rupiah plunges down to one of the lowest ever against US dollar, saying that a lot of investments are moving towards the US from Indonesia. Your insights on this, Pak Reza?
America today is to be led by Donald Trump, someone who is charismatic, someone who is ideological, and someone who knows what he's going to do.
And voted by the majority of people in the US.
Correct. And he make himself the chief of the American diplomacy and the American defense apparatus.
Okay.
So he knows what to do, and he really means what he said. So there would be a problem for others. So when for example, Donald Trump say, extra taxes for this country, he really meant that.
Yeah.
So in this case, it is very important for Indonesia to have a very qualified ambassador in the US so that can move to various kind of ministries, interact with various kind of ministries and offices, and also have a personal rapport with Donald Trump. Even though Donald Trump has a good rapport with President Prabowo. But we really need someone who can move from the legislative level, executive level, judicative level, and then the media, and then the masses. That's the job of the ambassador. Okay. So in this case, I sincerely hope that the Indonesian democracy will remain strong, and we will have a very high caliber ambassador for the US.
All right. Your take on this, Mas, Andrew. Let's forecast a little bit the upcoming administration of Trump and its impact towards its relations with Indonesia.
I think some of the few impacts have been felt by Jakarta with, you mentioned about exchange rate, right? So it's a function of at least two factors. The US economy has been getting stronger since Biden, and it can be even stronger under Trump in relative to our economy. Why? Because of one of the key policy that could be practiced by Trump, which is tax cuts. If President Trump, if Trump as president applies tax cut for U.S. companies, it means that the R&D research and development project would increase in U.S. companies. It means that the investment are coming back to the U.S. And it means that some of the opportunity would be lost for Indonesia. That's one. Second is for sure the trade wars might come back under Trump. It never leaves under Biden. And Biden especially, continues some of the Trump policies when it comes to curbing investment, and so on and so forth, but adding more of the environment elements and IRR elements in that. But if trade wars happen again, then trade becoming us versus them again under Trump, then it can be a problem for Indonesia. You know, if we look into statistics, what happened between 2017 and 2030, our exports to US market is actually decreasing, while our exports to Chinese markets is actually dramatically increasing. So this tells us the fact that we are getting more integrated with China in terms of economy, and this becomes non-innocent starting point for other policies, like for example joining BRICS. If we join BRICS in the era, in the context where our economy is getting more integrated with China, at the same time we fell into the sphere of influence of China within BRICS that is actually increasing, then it can tell different stories to leaders like Donald Trump.
Right. Let me just state the headlines of 2 days ago, that by 25th of January 2025, Indonesia will officially become a partner to BRICS. And Donald Trump has already made statements in regard to these, saying that if these countries in BRICS are starting to use less dollars, meaning that we are going forward with the de-dollarizations, they are going to experience the repercussions of this. What exactly did he mean by that, Mas Andrew?
Well, I'm not, we have to take that statement with a grain of salt.
Okay.
You know, when it comes to BRICS, it's not only U.S. enemies in BRICS. We still have countries like Brazil. We still have countries like India. In terms of the institution
aside
itself,
from Russia and China,
BRICS has, up until today, has never really fully realized all of the commitments which come to the problem of in the institutional form of BRICS. It remains a consensus-based kind of institutions. The commitment that has been said in rhetorics has not really fully transformed and translated into a fully functioning kind of compliance among the members. So we still have an uncertain situation whether the issues like de-dollarization would continue with that. I bet countries like even China would not be too enthusiastic for de-dollarization. The problem with BRICS, for China at least, they are still interested in making sure that yuan price is actually lower than it should be. So they still have this sort of economic power within BRICS. So, you know, but in terms of joining BRICS, for us, it's not the same with India joining BRICS or Malaysia joining BRICS. With some
Malaysia
sort of
is already a partner before us.
Well, it's when it comes to balancing economic influences between different directions, I think we have to be careful on this because many people, even when I visit Washington a couple months ago, for example, they have been expressing the fact that if all the industry and our national policies like local component policies, like downstreaming policy, have been dominated by the U.S. Our nickel industry, 80% dominated, smeltering of nickel industry, 80% has been dominated by China. This might become our source of vulnerability. So this creates some sort of perceptions among think tankers, policymakers in the U.S. about Indonesia. One thing that we have to remember when we are talking about U.S.-Indonesia relations, it's not only about president. We also have to deal with the civil society. We have to deal with their companies, and we also have to deal with their own congresses, which control the budget. So it's multiple kind of dimension that we have to deal with.
It should take us another hour just to take just to talk about this. But in regards to civil society, because we are pressed for time as we are going towards the ends of our special program, Pak Reza, I'd like to get your insights on some sort of a lighter topic of our relations, which is the socio-cultural people-to-people relations between Indonesia and the U.S. We know that a lot of our students are studying in the U.S. A lot of our Indonesian diasporas are making a living in the U.S. What are your takes on our people-to-people relations at this point, ways to further nurture and sort of foster social cultural relations with the U.S.?
We need to talk with the U.S. about the Islamophobia, because oftenly it is very hard for people who are affiliated with Muslim name or also institution to come to the US. Which
actually rose during the administrations of former President Trump 2016 to 2020. The Islamophobia.
Correct. So this is something we need to share the US. This is not good for the two countries, not also good for the world.
It is not acceptable.
Not acceptable. It put the US at the corner in the eyes of the developing countries. So in this case, yes, greater people-to-people relations should be accommodated, but also university-to-university cooperation, city-to-city cooperation, province-to-province cooperation should be more initiated by the two of us.
What do you think are the biggest allure of our students going to the U.S. to study? Because a lot of them, as a matter of fact, have continued to just working in the U.S. instead of returning to Indonesia.
Well, this is the problem, that we cannot force our students to come back. If we see at the moment we are confused at the LPDP about our students who are studying overseas, can they stay or have to come back? When during my age, sometime 1980s, 1990s, we had to come back. We had to come back. Even I
There's
signed
a policy on that.
Policy is
you have to return to.
I signed an agreement with the government of Indonesia. I have to come back. And then, so in this case, well, more exchanges between Americans and Indonesian, and then also city-to-city cooperation is very important. Because by doing this, people in one city of, let's say, Bandung, we have brothers and sisters somewhere in Fort Worth, because Bandung has a sister relation with Fort Worth in the U.S.
So this sister city.
Yes, sister
Bandung
city.
and Fort Worth.
Yes, so this is something we need to encourage more.
Share with us your experiences interacting with our American counterparts in terms of establishing communities, be it in your lane, which is international affairs and political and economical issues and discourses throughout your journey, Mas?
First, I have to agree with Pak Reza that our sort of multi-track kind of diplomacy must be exploited, well exploited when it comes to the U.S. As I mentioned before, when it comes to relationship between Indonesia and U.S., we are not talking about the government itself. We're talking about the vast decision made differently by civil society, by the U.S. campuses, U.S. think tanks, and U.S. companies first and foremost. But at the same time, when I talk to people in Washington, D.C., for example, they don't know anything about Indonesia except the one that has been published by New York Times.
So we're not doing enough diplomacy efforts in terms of introducing our country.
And sometimes what has been put into major U.S. newspaper about Indonesia, they still have this kind of path dependency when it comes to issues in Indonesia. They're still concerned, for example, over issues related to religious freedom, about some events related to banning church, or minorities issues in Indonesia, which for us in the country, it has become developed far beyond that. So we have to make sure that the decision makers, the lawmakers in the US read about Indonesia, knows about Indonesia, what is Indonesian niche, for example, in diplomacy. When we talk about green transition, we should be at the level of Brazil, for example. When we are talking about these issues in different multilateral settings, including the UN and so on and so forth. So we have to be able to put Indonesia into the radars of the public audience in Indonesia, and it takes more than wayang, gamelan, and so on and so forth. These are nice. It's some sort of, it creates some of the attractiveness of Indonesia, but putting our aspirations and our values, our way of life, our promise of democracy in major U.S. newspaper, news channels, it requires more than the usual kind of hard culture-based diplomacy.
Do you think that that's something that our President Prabowo will put on the agenda, because he's very keen on introducing Indonesia more to the world, especially to these big countries?
He has to appoint the ambassador first to the United States.
That is the first initial step.
That's the first thing that he needs to do.
Right. It's mind-boggling at this point when people, international people are saying, well, I know Bali, but I don't know anything about Indonesia. I've been to Bali, I haven't been to Indonesia. Bali is Indonesia. I mean, that's the fact that we need to sort of straighten out, and us, TVR Our World, one of our biggest missions is to balance out news coming out of Indonesia about Indonesia. Because if they hear all of these news outlets from informing things about Indonesia, these are just headlines that a lot of the times demean our positions and making us even more backward than they already think that that we are. So, so we are almost out of time. Let's just wrap this up, Pak Reza and Mas Andu, by inviting each and every one of you for, let's say, a few words of expectations. We are 75 years into our relations with the U.S. What are your biggest expectations moving forward?
Relations, in the same way with Pak Mantong observation, when it comes to bilateral relation, it is not exclusively G2G. Other actors should be also responsible.
B2B, you're saying?
B2B, P2P, C2C, cities to cities.
Cities to cities. I was going to ask what is C2C.
Yes, because cities, we have city diplomacy. In today's Indonesia, cities are permitted to do international relations, but they need to consult the central government of Indonesia. And then, of course, when it comes to the cities, we could expect greater attention from our partners. For example, they have research on Indonesia. They would like to send volunteers to Indonesia. I think cities could help. And also in campuses at the moment, we are hungry of accreditation. At the moment, most of us are at the Indonesian level. We need to embark to the Southeast Asian level and then to international level. Top US universities are there. I'm sure it's about time for Indonesian universities to do partnership with American universities.
So that is our biggest homework at the moment, aside from the efforts of diplomacy, you're saying. Maybe culinary diplomacy, gastro diplomacy to have also on the table. From you, Mas Andrew. Last.
You know, I think President Prabowo has a very good instincts in believing that we are entering into a new sort of great power politics tragedy. He invited John Mearsheimer to the briefing of the cabinet. But the one thing that I really hope from this administration with countries like, with the fact that Trump has been elected in the US is changing. In terms of being an independent country, we have experience so far in having two great powers competing against each other, and we're finding rooms, like for example, establishing ASEAN and so on and so forth. But what we have never experienced before is the changing West and changing democratic kind of society in Western countries. We never experienced that. We never experienced America that is stopping talk about issues like democracy, human rights. They are stopping now. Yeah. We also never experienced a United States that is not too invested in multilateral system like the UN and so on and so forth. We never experienced these kind of situations where the West is changing, and this requires a very delicate and very day-to-day calculation about where we're heading to with people like President Trump in the United States. And one thing that is, I also hope, at least from the American side, do not stop talk about democracy. It's still important for countries like Indonesia. We are multi-ethnic and multicultural societies, and so the United States do not stop about democracy. Here in the region, here in Indonesia, there in the Washington D.C., it remains an important sort of aspiration that is worth taking into consideration.
Right. And that is most especially in line with this year's theme of the celebration, which is diversity, democracy, and prosperity. And with that, we conclude our conversations after extend my gratitudes to lecturer on international relations, Padjadjaran University, Mr. Teuku Rezasyah, and also to researcher Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, Mr. Andrew Mantong. Thank you so much for your time and your insights here on TVR World. And we are just a few days away into 2025, so an early Happy New Year to both of you gentlemen. Thank you very much. And we conclude our special program here on TVR World, shining a light on 75 years of diplomacy between Indonesia and the United States of America. I'm Rahmat Idris from Jakarta, Indonesia. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.